Well, welcome to our session today on tips for assessing student learning using Blackboard. I am Jason Rohde, the Assistant Director of the Faculty Development and Instructional Design Center here at Northern Illinois University, and it's my pleasure to be with you. This is the second in a series of these kind of lunchtime sessions, online sessions we're offering, sharing some different tips for teaching and learning with Blackboard. And you'll notice on this initial slide here that I've included a link to a handout to accompany today's session. I'm going to go ahead and paste this I'm pasting this right now into the text chat area here in our online interface. So if you're either viewing the session or viewing the archive online, you see a link that you can click on to actually a wiki page where I've kind of detailed some of these tips that I'm going to be sharing that you can refer to, print off if you'd like later on. And you're also welcome to contribute to those tips if you'd like, and we'd love to have you be a part of and contribute to this kind of ongoing collection of tips for assessing learning in Blackboard. So as far as our agenda today, really I really want this to be as much a conversation as possible. I know it's easy in these types of sessions when you're participating to sit back and relax. Perhaps you are eating your lunch right now, and so I welcome you to feel free to do that. But if at any point in time you do have a tip that you'd like to share, I certainly would welcome you share that with the rest of us here today. Those of you that are viewing the archive and you don't have the opportunity perhaps to participate live during the session, you certainly can add those tips to our wiki page that we have as serving as our interactive handout for the session today. So really what I'm hoping to accomplish is to initially kick things off with a few preliminary thoughts about assessment, just from my own perspective and my own experiences in teaching, to kind of set the stage for the conversation that we'll have. And then overall, share just a few general assessment tips when it comes to assessing student learning online. And then from there, I've listed, I've kind of broken some of the tips that I have to share from experience down into some different categories, beginning with surveys in Blackboard, and if you're surveying students, some tips for logistically how you set those up and some best practices, as well as looking at tests and quizzes in Blackboard, and then finally also discussions and safe assignments, which are assignments that students submit that are checked for plagiarism, and how do you go about checking that. And then finally, set aside some time for just some general Q&A at the end. If you have other questions about Blackboard, maybe they're not even specifically assessment related, but you'd like to ask those, we certainly want to give you a chance to do that here as we go through our time today. So one other polling question that I want to put up right now to give a sense for those of you that are participating live today of the assessment tools that you currently are familiar with in Blackboard. So if you could check any of these tools that you either are familiar with and or you currently use in Blackboard. Go ahead and just check any of these or all of them if you're familiar with all of them, for example, and then hit the submit button just to give me a sense of your clarity. I am going to be talking about each of these different tools as we go along, and if everyone is familiar with them, we can kind of skip through the introduction part of those and right to some of the best practices. So I'll give everybody 10 seconds or so here to go ahead and respond to the survey question, and then be sure to hit the submit button after you have done so. All right, I'm going to go ahead and publish out the results. And so for the most part, it looks like everybody is for the most part familiar with almost all of these tools, perhaps maybe with SafeAssignments being that maybe we have to spend the most time perhaps introducing. But that's good to know that you have a good working understanding of what these tools are, because really today is devoted to talking about just some best practices and tips for making the best use of these tools in your teaching and learning. So I'd like to kick things off with a few questions for consideration. These are questions that obviously I'm not going to have you listen to the rest of us here in this workshop, but these are questions that I think as we think about assessment in general and we consider the possibilities of using online assessment tools, some questions that we want to keep in mind and consider for ourselves to be sure that we're framing our use of the technology in the most appropriate way possible. So first of all, really, when you thought assessment, what are the objectives for your course? So if you're thinking about, okay, I've got this course, I'm using Blackboard, and I want to perhaps make use of some of the assessment tools, you want to take a step back and first of all look at the objectives that you have for your course. And think about from just a very straightforward perspective, how are you currently measuring whether or not your students are meeting those objectives? So right now, what are you doing? How are you assessing the learning that's taking place? And I think if we took the time and everybody shared, I think we'd all have different approaches. Some use paper-based tests or quizzes. Others perhaps use more written types of assessments, subjective essays, and so forth. Project-based, I know obviously in the School of Visual and Performing Arts, doing a lot of recitals and labs and things where students are demonstrating mastery of skills. And so these are a lot of different approaches that we take to assessing learning of our students and whether or not they're meeting those objectives that we have. And it's important that we think about, okay, what are the instructional materials or the methods that you're currently using that help facilitate the learning process? Because ultimately, assessment is really just one of those catalysts to help make sure that we are meeting the needs of those students and that learning is taking place. And so there may be other materials and things that you're already using with your students that are effective in helping to get that message across. And you want to pick assessment tool methods that complement the types of instructional materials that you're already making use of. What are you currently doing to actively get your students engaged in the course, in the learning process? So they're just not sitting back, soaking up knowledge, so to speak, but how are you actively getting them involved? And assessment is one of those approaches where, depending on the types of assessments you're having students do, it can be a catalyst for getting them involved actively in the learning process. I'm curious just to hear perhaps right now, what are the types of assessments that you're currently using? So in the text chat area, maybe is one question we could respond to here. Are you using tests? Are you using quizzes? Are you doing lab reports? What are some of the types of assessments that you're currently using? If you could type those in the text chat area as we're going along here, that'd be helpful to get a sense of really what's working, what are the assessments that you're using, and beyond that, once you've identified those, I think it's important that we thought the purpose for them. Are they fostering the learning process, or are they simply a formality? There is the danger, especially in higher ed, to fall into because we've always assessed things a certain way that we just continue to do that. We were assessed a certain way perhaps when we were going through our studies, and so because of that, that's how we assess our students. And so take a step back and just evaluate that. It's good to do that periodically. I try to do that myself as I'm considering when I'm teaching a class. Is this truly measuring student learning, or is it just the simplest way to try to assess them and give them a grade for the class? A couple of other questions I like to throw out anytime I'm talking about assessment with faculty is, first of all, how do you define learning? What does true learning mean to you? And are students just regurgitating facts? Is that true learning? A year from now, is that knowledge still going to be there, or are they simply trying to pass a test, so to speak? I think it's important that we think about what do we define for our discipline, for the courses that we teach. What is true learning? What is mastery of the content? And how are we going to measure whether or not that's taking place? So I think really 3 attainable goals as I think about assessment myself, and I think we could all likely agree on these, that when we're seeking to assess learners, something that I try to do is my goals often for my assessments is to achieve critical thinking, to measure critical thinking, to encourage my students to think critically, as well as for them to apply what they're learning, and then reflect on that learning process. So the assessments that I often make use of in my own teaching will touch on, and I'll have a goal of at least one or several, sometimes more than one of these goals. So getting them to apply the material that we're talking about, think critically, and reflect. The acronym CAR works nicely to try to remember those, and I'll use that to try to recall and remind myself from time to time those goals as I'm selecting assessments for myself. And I think really the bottom line as we consider assessments is that really the outcomes should drive the assessments that we select, not the available technology. And we're going to talk about the online assessment tools that we have in Blackboard, but it's important that we always keep in mind that those outcomes need to drive the kinds of assessments that we're doing. Don't do a type of an assessment just because you can. There are a lot of really slick types of assessments now that are available in Blackboard that you can make use of, but again, don't just use an assessment because it's there. So let's now shift gears, and I'd like to share some general online assessment tips. These aren't specific to any one tool, and not even any one. We happen to have Blackboard here at NIU. That is the learning management system that faculty are often using. But these are some tips that I think would be applicable to any system or institution if you're thinking about online assessment in general. The first being to avoid high-stakes objective assessments online. There's a lot of reasons for this, but when you think about nowadays, as even as sophisticated as the technology is, students are still going to find ways, they can often find ways to cheat, especially online when students aren't in a proctored environment where you're not there to ensure that a given student is the student that's completing that test. There are just a lot of opportunities for students if want to find ways around the system and to cheat. There are many ways for them to do that. So in the online assessments that you do, I recommend that you avoid high-stakes objective assessments, the true-false multiple choice kinds of assessments as far as midterms or final exams. There are ways to do high-stakes testing that perhaps are more subjective, where you have questions that aren't just the true-false, but are more of the essay type, where you're getting a better representation of that given student's perspective, and it's more substantial in nature. Those types of assessments certainly do work better. And there are some things that you can do, and we'll talk a little more about this when we get to tests and quizzes, in which if you are doing objective types of assessments where you can randomize questions and do some things so that it's harder for students to cheat. But just be under the assumption, and I think a good perspective to take is that if a student is taking an online assessment and just be under the assumption that perhaps they have a textbook there or they have their friend sitting next to them helping them through this, and so don't be surprised if that's happening. Set up the assessments in such a way that that student is going to them personally have to respond and apply themselves to that assessment. I generally recommend that students complete a practice version of required online assessment just to become familiar with the technology. We, from time to time, instructors will sometimes run into issues where faculty will they'll report back saying, hey, I set up this quiz for my students, and I've got a bunch of them that are coming into errors, what's going on. And oftentimes user error, the students either are clicking the wrong buttons, or more commonly what happens is students will have multiple windows open and think that they can just multitask and have their music playing and watching a video while they're trying to take a quiz. And what often happens is they click something, or those other windows may sometimes interfere with the quiz. So I always recommend, we always encourage faculty to have the students complete some type of a practice version of that assessment, even if it's just a couple questions for no credit, just to make sure that they're comfortable with the technology and that their computer is working properly. That seems to help reduce some issues. From a practical standpoint, as you're setting up your course, I recommend that you, in Blackboard in particular, as you create assessments, it's a two-step process where you not only create that assessment, but then you deploy it in the course. You place it somewhere in the course where there's a link where the students click on that, and that process is referred to as deploying the assessment. And I recommend that you deploy that assessment link in the same folder as the content for the unit. So if you are using Blackboard for more than just assessments, but perhaps you're posting instructional content for your students, rather than keeping all assessments separate, from my own experience, students, it seems to be less confusing for them if the assessments that they complete are there right alongside of or right following, some of the instructional content that they view. So they're not going to different places in the course all the time to complete the different kinds of assessments or complete the different activities. And this just has to do with how you organize your course. I used to always keep the assignments separate, and after a lot of feedback I received from students, personally, I keep those within the same folder as the rest of the content for a given unit. Just another practical tip is that once you set up some of these different assessment types that we're going to talk about here today in a Blackboard course, that you can then reuse or repurpose those for other courses. So, for example, one of the assessments I do is have a survey at the beginning of any course that I use Blackboard for that I refer to as a technology experience survey, just to get a sense for the students' familiarity with the technologies that we'll be making use of. How familiar are they with Blackboard and other technologies we might be using? And this quiz or this survey is often, it's 5 to 10 questions. It's very simple. And I'll set up that survey one time in Blackboard, and then for any different course that I may be teaching, I can just copy that test basically from one course to another. So I don't have to set it up every time from scratch. I can just tweak it from course to course. And it's a big time-saving way to consider using the online assessment tool. So whenever possible, try to reuse and repurpose existing assessments that you might have. Just another tip would be to provide meaningful feedback to the student. So whether it's a test, a survey, an assignment, a paper that they're turning in, the literature shows that the feedback that you provide to the students is one of the most meaningful things that you can do. It really can help facilitate the learning process so they learn from that assessment. And so find different ways to provide feedback. And in Blackboard, you can leave comments now within the Grade Center. You can also, if it's a written assignment that they're turning in through something like SafeAssign, which we'll talk about in a little bit, you can attach a revised version of that back to the students with, with comments within it. And from my own experience, again, I found that students find that meaningful feedback to be among the most beneficial aspects of my teaching. And remember that there is no guaranteed approach to preventing cheating online. So everything that we're going to talk about today, we'll share some tips, and perhaps those of you joining us, if you have other tips that you'd like to share, there are things we can do to help deter cheating and to encourage academic integrity. But yet, at the end of the day, there's no guaranteed approach. Students can, there are different things they can do. They're very resourceful, and so we want to do our very best to use assessments that are really more of a true measure of learning that perhaps are going to be more difficult for them to cheat with. So let's take a look now at some of the different assessment types. We'll start with surveys. So a survey, obviously, in Blackboard is a way to gain some anonymous feedback from your students. You can't see, by definition, surveys are anonymous, so you cannot see how a student responded over another. It's really used to gather aggregate responses from the students. It's important. Remind your students that the surveys are, in fact, anonymous, that they, and that's really one of the benefits of using surveys, is that you won't see one student's response over another. The only thing you will see is which of your students did complete the survey. So if you do have a very small class and you use a survey, you obviously that anonymity can be compromised if you have a very small number. But in general, you do have surveys are anonymous in Blackboard. A tip that I found is that if you are using a survey in Blackboard that has more than 5 questions, if you display the question one question at a time rather than having all the questions show up on the screen, it tends to reduce some of the user error opportunities. What ends up happening, especially on older types of connections, this isn't quite as big of an issue now as broadband internet, high-speed internet is becoming more popular and more widely available. But especially students that are on older internet connections or connections that are slower, not as reliable, is if the page that they're on sits idle for too long, sometimes they can get timed out from that page. And so if they have more than 5 questions, if it's going to take them more than a minute or two to answer those questions, then what you want to do is have those display one question at a time. And so after they answer that question, they click to move on to the next question, their Blackboard will automatically save that response from that first question and will keep their browser, their internet connection to that course fresh. And it seems to, things seem to work a little better, especially with students that have slower connections if they're clicking to go on to each separate question and having Blackboard save as they go. The other thing that happens is if they encounter some type of an issue, their computer locks up or something, they'll have any of the responses that they had completed will have already been saved, and you'll be able to see how far they got in the survey. Whereas if it was just 20 questions on one page, they got partway through it and then something happened or they clicked the wrong button, those responses wouldn't be saved. If you're in a situation where you want to share those survey results with students, one of the things that you can do is you can copy and paste the results that you get in Blackboard to something like a Word document, and then you can post that in Blackboard to share with your students. Blackboard does give you some very simple bar graph type of reporting displays. In the Grade Center, you can see kind of in aggregate how your students respond to each of the questions, but you don't get a report per se that you can share with the student. So if you want to do that, just copy and paste from Blackboard into the Word document and then post that document in Blackboard for your students. And I'll often do that in the example I mentioned earlier with the Technology Experience Survey. Sometimes I want my students to see that, to know how technically adept are they as a class. And so perhaps I'll share those results in a Word document for the students. So those are some of my tips for using surveys for it. And I'm curious to hear, I'm going to pause here and see if anyone has any other tips that you'd like to share in terms of using surveys with your students, things that you have experienced yourself, or other ideas that you'd like to share. So feel free to type those in the text chat, or if you'd like to share an audio comment, you can raise your hand, and I'll just take a moment here and give everyone to share if they'd like. All right, we'll move on and take a look now at tests and quizzes. And in Blackboard, the term test is the default name for the assessment tool that could be used to either collect and have students complete tests or quizzes within Blackboard. The difference between a test and a survey is that tests you obviously can see not only who completes the test, but how each person responds, and you can those tests can be set up to either automatically be scored if they have subjective questions. If you do use, or I should say objective questions, true, false, multiple choice. If you have open-ended questions, essay questions, short answer type questions within your assessment, the test or the quiz, those you can manually grade, and Blackboard can do any automated grading. So if you have a combination of some multiple choice questions and then maybe an essay or question at the end, Blackboard will automatically grade the true, false, multiple choice portion, the objective portion, and then you can grade only those questions that need manual grading. One of the tips that we recommend is if you have a large number of questions that you'd like to get into Blackboard, rather than manually entering all of those, there is a tool that was developed, the web-based tool developed by the College of Southern Idaho called the Blackboard Quiz Generator. And we have a link to this on the Teaching with Blackboard website, which you can find at niu.edu/Blackboard. And if you are there and you take a look at, I'll try putting that in the text chat here once again. If you go there and go to the Blackboard A to Z index and look for Blackboard Quiz Generator, we have some information and a link to this tool, this free tool that's available for anyone to use. And what it does is it's a format, tool that will take a list of questions that you have formatted in a very simple way using any word processor, and then it will create a zipped file that can be imported into Blackboard that will have all of those questions, and it formats the questions in a way that they can in batch be put into a Blackboard course. And this is very helpful if you have a pool of questions, you've got a lot of questions that you want to get into Blackboard. The Blackboard Quiz Generator is a great way to do that. And so we have information on how to do that. It's a pretty straightforward process, but certainly you can follow up with any of our faculty development staff if you have questions, and we'd be to help you use that tool. One of my tips is that with any time possible to try to add test questions to pools for easy reuse and expansion. There's two ways in Blackboard to create tests and quizzes. You can manually set up a test and then put questions, add questions to that test, which is fine. The other way, the second way that you can create tests is to put those questions into pools. Basically, taking the questions, say, maybe you have questions for each of the chapters of your textbook, and you have a test that's going to be chapters 1 through 3. Rather than creating a test and manually putting those questions all into that test, you put all of the Chapter 1 questions into what's called a pool in Blackboard. Chapter 2 could go into a Chapter 2 pool, and the Chapter 3 questions likewise into a Chapter 3 pool. Then what you can do in Blackboard when you create the test is you set up the test and you put, there's a question type called a random block of questions, where you can at random have the test in, say, 3 questions from the Chapter 1 pool, and then 3 questions from Chapter 2, and so forth. And in that way, the test is set up to kind of at random pull in questions from those pools. Now, let's say you don't have a lot of questions, and you're thinking, well, why would I want to do that? I only have 3 or 4 questions in each pool. Well, over time, if you wish to add more questions to that, once you set up tests, you can simply add questions to those pools, and you've dynamically updated your tests to have larger pools to pull from. And so I recommend that you take a look at that. Check with your textbook publisher to see if they don't already offer some sort of question pools for your textbook. Many textbook publishers now do have, sometimes it's referred to as a course cartridge that goes along with their textbook for Blackboard, or different publishers are offering other types of digital content that can be either linked directly into Blackboard or can be imported in. Tests and quizzes would be among those. There is a new partnership that Blackboard was just announced this past week here at NIU that Blackboard has partnered with McGraw-Hill, the textbook publisher, and any faculty that use a McGraw-Hill textbook, McGraw-Hill does have digital content that's available for free for the faculty member to use. And through this new partnership, faculty can use pre-set up tests and other types of digital content directly within their Blackboard course. And scores will automatically save to the Blackboard Grade Center. It's really a slick new tool. And so if anyone here is a McGraw-Hill, you haven't used McGraw-Hill textbooks, you'll want to find out more information on this, and you can follow up with me, I'd be happy to provide more details. So whenever possible, you want to create tests from random blocks of those questions. So as I mentioned, when you add questions, if you add more questions over time to those pools, they'll automatically, those tests will be updated. So I see from Erica, I see you typed in your question about quiz grading. If Blackboard grades a quiz, will the grades show up in the gradebook automatically? And if there's already a space for that quiz. Great question, Erica. The way that the tests work in Blackboard is when you create the test, and then you create that test, and it's called the test manager, and then you deploy it in your course. So you put the link in your course. When that happens, Blackboard automatically puts a column in your grade center that corresponds to that test, so that when a student completes the test, there's a place for Blackboard to put that score. And yes, if your quiz all has objective questions, true, false, multiple choice, that you when you create the questions, designate a correct answer. Blackboard will automatically grade those and put the score automatically, not only in your grade center where you can see it, but your students will also then see that score immediately once they take the quiz. So if you happen to have a quiz set up where you have some multiple choice true false questions, and then you have some other short answer or open-ended essay type questions, Blackboard will automatically grade those, the objective questions for you. It'll put in your grade center a little, it looks like an exclamation mark, a little icon that indicates that this assessment needs some attention from you as the instructor, and so you can click on it, you can see how the student responded, you can manually grade questions that need manual grading, and then when you submit that, the score then does show up for the students. So, great question. A couple of other general tips about tests and quizzes. Pay attention to the test options when you deploy a test. There are options when it comes to how you set up, do students see all the questions at once or one at a time? Do you have a time limit so they only have so long to complete that test? Can they save their results and come back later, or do they have to complete it in one sitting? There are a lot of different settings there that they can choose from. So you want to make sure that you take a look at those and that you set up the test in such a way that does in fact match your objectives for that. You can also do things such as set up what we call as part of that timer. You can set even a password if you want to give out a password in class that you want the students to put in before they can take the test. Obviously, they could tell that password to one of their fellow classmates and they could still get in, but that's another one of these features that's there. So when you deploy that test, you have to find the test options and make it available before the students can take it. You can also set date ranges. You can say, I don't want students to take this test until after class on Tuesday, and they have until class on Thursday. So you can set those types of parameters as well. You can randomize questions, and I recommend that you do this to at least make it more difficult for the students to cheat. You can go ahead and if you use that random block feature, they'll get the questions at random from the pools, but you can also randomize a set number of questions from within a test as well. So with that, does anyone have any other test or quiz tips that you'd like to share? And Eric, thanks. I'm glad that answered your question earlier. But any other tests or quiz tips, feel free to type those in the text chat area or raise your hand and I'll turn the mic over to you. Being mindful of the time here, I'm going to go ahead and move on to discussions because we've got a couple other areas here to be sure I want to make sure we mention. When it comes to discussions in Blackboard and assessing student discussions, first and foremost, provide some clear expectations for the students for how the discussions will be assessed. Provide them with a rubric or some clear guidelines as to what you're looking for as you're assessing student discussions in Blackboard. You can set up in Blackboard a forum to be graded, and do that. There's a column, just like tests, when you deploy a test in Blackboard, within the Blackboard Grade Center, there'll be a column for that discussion assignment. Inside of the, when you configure those discussions to be graded, I recommend that you choose the option to grade by forum and not by thread. So by grade by forum, what I mean is that the students, when you grade that, the forum itself, there's one score for the entire discussion forum. If you select the option to grade by thread, every time that a student creates a new thread in the discussion board, a new column will be created in your grade center. And so very quickly you have this mess of columns in the grade center. So I highly recommend do the grade by forum option. If you're going to do grade by thread, so maybe within a particular discussion you have 3 questions that you want them to respond to each one, and you're going to grade each one independently. You can do that, but I recommend that you turn off the ability for students to add new threads. So they only can respond to threads that you've started, and that there would only be, in that example, 3 columns in the grade center for those 3 scores, and you still continue, retain the control of your grade center. After entering scores for contributions, then can enter comments directly in the grade center. And this is how it used to work in Blackboard. In the next version that we will be upgrading to in Blackboard this coming May, Blackboard Next Generation, has a much more elegant way for grading discussions, where you'll be able to not only grade that discussion and give them a score, but put feedback in immediately. In Blackboard, you have to put the scores in the discussion grade view, and then you have to go to the grade center to put the comments in after you've put the scores in. And it's a clunky way right now to do it. It does work, but you have to remember, okay, why did I give that student a 4 instead of a 5? It's easier to be able to put those comments right in with the score, and that is coming with the next version of Blackboard that we'll be upgrading to here at NIU. Any other discussion tips that anyone has? Feel free to share those at this point. We do, the Faculty Development and Instructional Design Center, we do have some sample discussion rubrics. So if you're looking to grade student discussion, you can follow up with me, and I'd be happy to send a link of those to you. You can make use of those. You can customize them for your own use. I think it's important that you just have those expectations clearly laid out for your students. So the next type of assessment would be the assignments in Blackboard. Now, Blackboard does have a specific assignment tool, sometimes referred to as Assignment Manager, and you'll want to use that instead of the current digital Dropbox. The Assignment Manager is a tool that allows for the collection of assignments electronically, so that you've got not only the assessments that they turn in, but you can add comments and feedback, and you can send that electronically back to the students right from within Blackboard. There's no sending those back and forth. If you've used the digital Dropbox, and if you've used the digital Dropbox before, if you could just click the little check mark to let me know that you have, or the X if you haven't. The digital Dropbox is a tool that has been available in Blackboard for quite some time. It was originally designed, it was kind of the first way of collecting assignments, more of a way of sending things back and forth, but it wasn't integrated with the Grade Center. And so this new Assignment Manager tool is in fact integrated directly within the Blackboard Grade Center. And we do have one of our recent online workshops dealt with collecting assignments electronically in Blackboard. If you go back to, if you take a look at our archives for our online faculty development programs, you'll find a session on collecting assignments electronically in Blackboard that provides in great detail how this new Assignment Manager works, how you set it up. I recommend that you attach, when you're setting these up, that you attach assignment instructions to the assignment. So you give them maybe perhaps even a file to work from. If you have certain margins, if it's a written assignment that you want them to follow, you can go ahead and attach that for the students. You can then, after you've received all the assignments in Blackboard in the Grade Center, there'll be a column that'll have all of them. You can download all of those submitted assignments for offline grading. This is a very handy way to get all of those assignments in batch out of Blackboard. Currently, if you use the digital Dropbox, which this tool, by the way, the digital Dropbox is going away in the next version of Blackboard, that currently you have to manually one by one delete those assignments rather than in batch being able to pull all of those out kind of in one fell swoop. And so I recommend that you download the assignments like that. Then you can enter feedback electronically and return that to the students via the assignment. So what I'll often do is I'll take those assignments, I'll save a version of each one with a slightly different file name, and then I'll put my comments directly in the file. There's a couple ways to do this. You can either just maybe change the font color and type above or below what the students have written, or you can use, if you use Microsoft Word, use the track changes feature and put the comments right in the paper, and then attach it back to the students. And again, it's a great way to give them contextual feedback on their work. I don't know if anyone else here has used the assignment tool. If you have other tips, you're certainly welcome to share those. And I want to move on and talk a little bit about SafeAssignments now. And these differ from assignments in the fact that when a student submits a safe assignment through Blackboard, the faculty member, you receive not only the student's assignment, but an originality report that checks the internet, it checks the ProQuest digital library and their collection of resources for plagiarism of those sources. It also checks some different paper mill sources as well, and gives you an originality report with that student's assignment. And we have a lot of information about how SafeAssignment works and how to set it up. We offer workshops as well as have online resources on SafeAssign. And so in particular, as you're setting up SafeAssign, a couple of tips that I would recommend is, first of all, if you are doing substantial written assignments, and that you use SafeAssign so that it does some checking for you. It will do a couple of things. First of all, it checks to see if that student work is original. It will, if you also save a copy of that into kind of NIU's SafeAssign database of submitted work. So that student, if someone got that student's paper and tried to resubmit it, it would flag that in the future as being, some work that's already been turned in. We had a philosophy faculty member who's teaching a large philosophy course and had a rampant issue with students passing down papers, written work from one to another, and several hundred seat course where it was impossible for him to be able to check every assignment. And so to curb the plagiarism and the passing down of papers, he implemented SafeAssign, and it was the solution that he needed to help curb that. And so you can feel free to make use of it for that. Inform the students. I like to inform the students right in the syllabus that they're going to be required to use SafeAssign. So it's not a surprise that their work is going to be checked as part of turning it in. You can set up, and I recommend this, a draft version of the SafeAssign to submit to in advance to self-check their work. Sometimes the students just don't know how to properly cite something, or they forget to put a citation in. And you can set up a draft version of that assignment that students can submit their work to. They can get that originality report back, and in doing so, then they can see before they submit it for real to be great. You can check their work and see if they have in fact missed a citation or something to that effect. And then you can also, and I recommend this, make the originality reports viewable to the student. So when they do submit that SafeAssign in for you to grade, that not only do you see that originality report, but they see it as well. So there's transparency. They know exactly what you're. And then if there's an issue and you need to follow up with them, they've already seen that yes, there's an issue here that needs to be addressed. And so we have some additional SafeAssign tips on the site. The Teaching with Blackboard site does have a whole page devoted to SafeAssign where we have some tips. The SafeAssign wiki. Blackboard has a wiki devoted to SafeAssign that has some additional tips and things. But I encourage you to give SafeAssign a try, and if you have further questions in doing so, be sure to let us know. So I'm going to pause here and just see if anyone has any other general questions about Blackboard. It might be assessment related or just Blackboard in general that you'd like to ask. We'll give you a chance to go ahead and ask those. Take a moment here to open the mic for any other general questions. All right. Well, I do want to mention, since we don't have any other general questions, that the session handout, once again, that we do have that accompanies this workshop today. And again, the address is blackboardtips.wikispaces.com/assessments. It's just an open, free wiki that we set up where I've included all of this information, and you're going to add other tips that you might have to this kind of online collection of tips. We do, as I mentioned, the session has been recorded, and the archives are available online. We do have a page on our Faculty Development and Instructional Design Center website where you find all of the archives for all of our past online programs. That's where you'll find this archive as well, again, later this afternoon. You can also find the archives, as I mentioned. We have them in a podcast format, and they are available in iTunes. You can do a search if you have iTunes on your computer or on a mobile device. If you just do a search for NIU Faculty Development, you'll find NIU Faculty Development Program Archives podcast, and you can feel free to subscribe in iTunes, and then you'll be able to download and view the video portion of each of these sessions in mobile form on your mobile device. I will put up my contact information, so feel free, after the session, or if you have further questions as you get started using the assessment tools in Blackboard. I've included here my email and phone contact information that you can reach me. And I am also going to put open in a new window an evaluation for today's workshop. So before you leave, if you could go ahead and complete that, just let us know. Give us some feedback. We'd greatly appreciate it. And after you complete the evaluation, you're free to leave. So thank you so much for joining us. We'll end the archive at this point, and thank you for joining us. Hope you're able to join us again for another Blackboard workshop in the future. Be on the lookout for information, more workshops coming on the new Blackboard Next Generation that will be coming to NIU later on this spring. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day, and we hope to see you at another session again real soon.